I never imagined that my biggest achievement in bodybuilding would become my biggest loss, and that discovering my girlfriend's betrayal would be just the beginning of something much more sinister. My name is Rick. I'm 28 years old, and 3 weeks ago I discovered that while I was stepping onto the podium to receive my third-place medal at a regional competition, the woman I loved was destroying my life in an orchestrated and calculated way that I could never have imagined. Here's a truth that nobody tells you about relationships. Some people are capable of destroying years of love in a matter of weeks when they feel threatened. And what I discovered about Marina made me question everything I thought I knew about human nature. Please subscribe to the channel now, because this story will show how obsessive jealousy can transform a person into something unrecognizable, how sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the most elaborate and cruel betrayals, and mainly, how a revenge that seemed to have been planned perfectly had a final twist that neither she, nor I, nor anyone saw coming. A twist that completely changed the meaning of everything that happened and made me realize that sometimes even the worst situations can transform into the best thing in our lives. Everything started so naturally that I couldn't even imagine where it would lead. Marina and I met at Gold's Gym in Phoenix, Arizona, on just another Tuesday afternoon. She was doing free squats, and I couldn't take my eyes off that determination she had. It wasn't just because of her beauty, it was because of her real grit. When she finished her set, I approached to offer help with the bar, and that's where our story began. We talked about training, about goals, about life, and by the end of that week, we were already training together every day. It was too perfect to be true, and as I would discover later, it really was. The first months were like one of those romantic movies that you watch and think, man, this only happens on screen. We trained together. She motivated me on difficult days. I helped her with the technique of more complex exercises. The chemistry between us was so intense that even other gym members commented about the perfect couple we made. Marina had a contagious energy, one of those people who lights up the environment just by arriving. She was intelligent, funny, and had a thirst for living that inspired me to be a better version of myself. I was completely in love, and she seemed to be too. At least, that's what I thought at the time. But then things started to change in a very subtle way, you know? Like those changes that you only notice when you look back. I had always been dedicated to training, but at that time I was in a phase of absurd evolution, gaining mass, defining, really seeing results that I had never seen before. And of course, in a gym full of people, this didn't go unnoticed. First came compliments from trainers, then some older members started giving me tips, and eventually, some women started making comments about my physique. Nothing major, you know? That normal gym talk, wow, you're growing a lot. What exercise do you do to get arms like that? Those things? For me, it was just motivation, proof that the work was paying off. Marina started getting weird after a woman named Jennifer, a blonde in her mid-30s who was always at the gym at the same time as us, made a comment about my physique right in front of her. Jennifer came up to me and said, "Rick, you're getting a competitor's physique, huh? I bet you'll go far if you decide to compete." It was an innocent compliment, but I saw Marina's face change completely. She got tense, forced a smile, and for the rest of the workout barely spoke to me. When we left the gym, she started with that talk. "Did you see how she looked at you? She was practically offering herself to you. You didn't even try to hide that you liked the attention." I was confused, because for me, nothing major had happened. I tried to explain that it was just a compliment about training, but she already had that closed-off look that I would learn to know very well. From then on, any interaction I had with other women at the gym became grounds for a fight. If I greeted someone, she said I was being too friendly. If someone asked me for an exercise tip, she thought I was showing off. If a woman looked in my direction, she would give me that look of, "I saw what happened there." I started walking around the gym like I was walking on eggshells, always careful not to give reason for another argument. I tried to talk to her, explain that I only had eyes for her, that those people meant nothing. But it was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. The more I tried to justify, the more she suspected. And the worst part is that I started feeling guilty about something I hadn't even done. This feeling of guilt would grow so much that I couldn't even imagine what she would be capable of doing when she really lost control. That's when I started to understand that there was something much deeper going on there. It wasn't just normal jealousy, you know? It was something obsessive, possessive, that was starting to suffocate not only our relationship, but also my own evolution. I found myself choosing different times to train, avoiding certain areas of the gym, refusing help from trainers just to avoid creating more problems. And the craziest part is that the more I tried to adapt to her insecurities, the more insecure she became. It was as if my dedication to not causing jealousy was proof that I really had something to hide. I didn't know yet, but this toxic dynamic that was forming would lead me to discover what a truly jealous person is capable of when they feel threatened. And believe me, what I discovered was much worse than anything I could have imagined at that time. In the following months, my physique continued evolving in a way I had never experienced before. It was like my body had finally found the right rhythm. Each workout yielded more, each exercise seemed more effective, and results appeared almost weekly. I could see the difference in the mirror, in clothes that fit tighter, in how I felt more confident walking through the gym. But what for me was a source of pride and dedication, for Marina had become a constant source of anxiety and paranoia. She started counting how many times women looked at me during our workouts, as if it were a mathematical competition where she always lost. The atmosphere between us became so tense that I felt like I was carrying a time bomb that could explode at any moment. What caught my attention most was how other people at the gym started treating me differently. Tommy, one of the most experienced trainers, started giving me more advanced tips and even suggested I consider training with him. Some older members invited me to train together, and I noticed I had gained a kind of respect that comes when you show consistency and results. Even the reception staff greeted me with more enthusiasm, as if I had become some kind of success example at the gym. This recognition was something I had always wanted, but I never imagined it could be so problematic. Marina interpreted every smile, every greeting, every conversation as a direct threat to our relationship. It was like I had to choose between being successful at what I loved doing or maintaining peace with the woman I loved. The fights started following a pattern that left me completely exhausted. She would create scenarios in her head based on completely innocent interaction. And when I tried to explain, she would say I was lying, or that I was too naive to notice other people's intentions. Once, a woman named Lisa asked me to show her how to do a certain back exercise, and I explained the technique politely and quickly. Marina was silent for the rest of the workout, and when we got home, she exploded. "Did you see how she looked at you? She didn't even need that help. She just wanted an excuse to talk to you." I tried to be patient, tried to show that I only saw her, but my words seemed to have no weight against the ghosts she created in her own mind. It was frustrating because I felt that no matter what I did, she would always find a way to turn my loyalty into betrayal. The psychological pressure I felt was something I had never experienced before in a relationship. It was like I constantly had to prove my fidelity, but the proof was never enough. I started avoiding unnecessary conversations at the gym, changed my posture to be more closed off, and even stopped wearing some shirts that highlighted my physique just to avoid attention. Ironic, right? I was hiding from the results of my own hard work. Marina noticed these changes and for a while seemed calmer, but I didn't know that this was just the calm before the storm. She was interpreting my adaptation not as love, but as confirmation that she was right to suspect me. The turning point came when I was invited to participate in a special training session with some of the most advanced guys at the gym. It was an incredible opportunity to learn new techniques and train with people who really knew what they were doing. When I told Marina, she reacted as if I had announced I was moving to another planet. "Why do you need to train with other people? Am I not enough for you? You want to impress more people, is that it?" I tried to explain that it was about evolution, about learning, about challenging myself, but she only heard betrayal and abandonment. At that moment, I realized that our relationship had reached a point where my personal growth was seen as an existential threat. It was like she preferred to see me stagnant and mediocre than see me developing and potentially dangerous to her emotional security. It was after that special training that I started to notice there was something much more complex happening. The guys I trained with, Marcus, a veteran of several competitions, and Derek, who had just gotten his pro card, told me about amateur competitions in the region. They said I had potential, that with the right dedication, I could go far in the world of bodybuilding. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found not just a passion, but maybe a true calling. But when I got home and casually mentioned this conversation to Marina, I saw something in her eyes that made me realize our story was about to take a much darker turn. It was a mix of fear, anger, and something I could only identify later, the determination of someone who would do anything not to lose control. I still didn't know, but this innocent conversation about competition had just planted the seed of what would be my greatest achievement and, at the same time, my greatest tragedy. The decision to compete didn't come overnight. It was built over weeks of conversations with Marcus and Derek, who had become not just training partners, but true mentors. They showed me competition videos, explained about categories, talked about the mental discipline that bodybuilding required beyond the physical. I saw in those guys a passion that went far beyond vanity or seeking attention. It was about overcoming, about discovering how far you can take your body and mind. When Marcus showed me photos from his first competition, I saw in his eyes a satisfaction that I had never felt in any area of my life. It was like he had found his true essence, his reason for being. I wanted to experience that feeling, wanted to know what it was like to have a goal as clear and tangible as stepping on stage and showing the result of months of absolute dedication. During those weeks, I started researching amateur competitions in the Phoenix region. I discovered there would be a regional championship in 4 months, enough time for serious preparation if I started immediately. Derek explained to me that the first competition is always a milestone in any bodybuilder's life, regardless of placement. That's where you discover if you really have the stomach for this world. I spent entire nights watching videos, reading about cutting diets, studying poses, imagining what it would be like to be on that stage. It was like a new version of myself was being born, a version I didn't even know existed. But every time I looked to the side and saw Marina watching TV with that distant expression, I felt a tightness in my chest, as if I was betraying not just her, but also the future we had planned together. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Thursday night. Marina noticed I was different, more focused, more determined, and asked what was happening. I took a deep breath and said, "Mari, I've decided I'm going to compete in the Regional Bodybuilding Championship in April." The silence that followed was so heavy I could hear the sound of the refrigerator turning on in the kitchen. She looked at me as if I had spoken in a language she didn't understand. And then came that question I knew was coming. Why, Rick? Why do you need this? I tried to explain about personal challenges, about discovering my potential, about having a concrete goal for all that dedication. But while I spoke, I saw her face transform. First confusion, then fear, and finally, a rage I had never seen before. It was like I had announced I was moving to another country without her. The explosion came in a way I never imagined she would be capable of. "Have you lost your mind, Rick? Don't you see that this is exactly what I'm afraid of? You're going to go on stage in briefs in front of dozens of people. There will be photos of you spread around. You'll have a bunch of women following you on Instagram." She started pacing back and forth in the living room, gesticulating as if she was trying to make me see something obvious that I was ignoring. "Don't you realize this is going to end us? That I won't be able to deal with all this exposure?" I tried to interrupt, tried to explain that it had nothing to do with other people, but she continued. "What if you become famous? What if you start getting offers? What if you decide I'm no longer enough for you?" Each question was like a stab, because I realized she wasn't just afraid of the competition, she was afraid of losing control over me. I'm sure many of you have been through similar dilemmas. when you have to choose between your dreams and the person you love. If that's the case, leave in the comments how you dealt with it. What struck me most in that argument was how she made it seem like I was being selfish for wanting to grow. You don't need competition to be a good bodybuilder. Why can't you just train for yourself, for me, for both of us? It was like she wanted to keep me in a bubble, safe and controlled, where she knew exactly where I was and what I was doing at every moment. I started to realize that her love had transformed into possession, and that my happiness was only valid if it didn't represent a threat to her insecurity. At that moment, I had to make the most difficult decision of my life up to that point. Choose between the love I felt for her and the respect I owed myself. The argument lasted hours, with her making ultimatums and me trying to find a middle ground that didn't exist. If you compete, Rick, you're going to have to choose between this madness and our relationship, she said with tears in her eyes, because I won't be able to stay here watching you show off to everyone while I die of jealousy at home. I looked at her and realized there was no more room for negotiation. It was all or nothing, black or white, no shades of gray. At that moment, I understood that if I gave up the competition, I would be giving up a part of myself I had just discovered. And if I moved forward, I would be losing the woman I loved. The irony is that I thought this was the most difficult decision I would have to make. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come, and that the choice I made that night would trigger a series of events that would change my life forever. After that night of argument, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to compete, with or without Marina's support. The next day, I sought out Marcus and made my registration for the regional championship official. I was going to compete in the men's physique category, which was perfect for my body type and experience level. From that moment, my life was completely transformed. Preparation for a bodybuilding competition is no joke. It's an exact science that involves precise diet, periodized training, strategic supplementation, and mental discipline that borders on obsession. Marcus gave me a schedule that looked more like a military man. Times to wake up, to train, to eat, to sleep, everything calculated to the minute. I knew the next 4 months would test not just my physique, but my determination in a way I had never experienced before. What I didn't know is that they would also test my relationship to the breaking point. The first signs that things weren't going to be easy appeared in the first week of preparation. Marina started making acidic comments about my new routine. "You're becoming a robot. You care more about this diet than about me. You don't even look at me properly anymore." I tried to explain it was temporary, that after the competition everything would go back to normal, but she didn't want to hear it. What hurt me most was seeing how she sabotaged my efforts in subtle ways. She would come home with fast food, make comments about how I was getting too skinny, question whether all that sacrifice was really worth it. It was like she was rooting against me, hoping I would give up and go back to being the controllable Rick she knew. The tension at home became so heavy that I started preferring to spend more time at the gym, not just for training, but because it was the only place where I felt truly supported. Marcus and Derek became not just my trainers, but my true friends during this phase. They understood the pressure I was going through at home because they had lived through similar situations. "Dude, competition prep is a fire test for any relationship," Derek told me once. "If the person really loves you, they'll support your dreams, even if they don't completely understand." They helped me adjust my diet when I plateaued in the second week, taught me posing techniques I never imagined were so complex, and mainly gave me the emotional support I wasn't getting at home. During our workouts, I could forget about the problems with Marina and focus on what really mattered, transforming myself into the best version of myself. It was ironic how I felt more connected to these guys I had known for a few months than to the woman I had loved for almost 2 years. As the weeks passed, the distance between me and Marina became increasingly obvious. She stopped going to the gym with me, claiming she couldn't stand seeing me obsessed with training anymore. Our conversations were limited to basic, "Good morning, good night, what are we having for dinner?" when she wasn't giving me the complete cold shoulder. The worst part is that I noticed how she was different, not just with me, but with everyone. She started going out more with friends, coming home late, and when I asked where she had been, she answered evasively. I tried not to think too much about it because I was completely focused on preparation, but a voice deep in my mind whispered that something wasn't right. I just didn't imagine how wrong things really were. The 8th week of preparation was when I realized I had crossed a point of no return. My physique was in a shape I had never imagined possible. Every muscle defined, skin thin, veins apparent, abs with those divisions you only see in magazines. When I looked in the mirror, sometimes I didn't recognize myself. It was like I had sculpted a work of art with my own body. Marcus and Derek were impressed with my evolution, saying I had potential to go much further than an amateur competition. But at home, this physical transformation only increased the distance between me and Marina. She looked at me like I was a stranger, and several times I caught her staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Was it fear, anger, or something else? I tried to start conversations about other subjects, tried to reconnect with her, but it was like trying to hug a wall of ice. What worried me most was how Marina had started acting strangely with my gym friends. Whenever Marcus or Derek came to pick me up for some extra training or posing session, she treated them with a coldness that bordered on hostility. But at the same time, I noticed she started asking things about them, where they lived, if they were single, how long they had been doing bodybuilding. At the time, I thought it was just curiosity. But now I understand she was collecting information for a very specific reason. The last significant conversation we had before the competition was her asking if I was sure about what I was doing, if I really thought it was worth destroying what we had built together. I replied that I didn't want to destroy anything, that after the competition we could talk and resolve everything. She looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Okay, Rick, let's see what happens after your competition." I didn't know at the time, but that phrase was a death sentence for our relationship, and for my friends too. The day of the competition arrived like a hurricane of emotions I had never experienced before. I woke up at 5 a.m. with that crazy mix of anxiety, excitement, and nervousness that made my heart race. It was 4 months of intense preparation being condensed into this single day, and I knew that everything I had been through, the restrictive diets, the exhausting workouts, the problems with Marina, everything had led to this moment. I looked to the side of the bed and saw that Marina was still sleeping, or at least pretending to be. Throughout the previous week, she had been evasive about whether or not she was going to support me at the competition, always changing the subject when I brought it up. That morning, I decided I wasn't going to insist anymore. I had to accept that she had made her choice, and I had made mine. What I didn't imagine is that her absence would be the least of my problems that day. The trip to the convention center in Scottsdale was tense, but at the same time liberating. Marcus was driving and Derek was in the passenger seat, both trying to keep me relaxed with conversations about strategy and posing techniques. They had become more than friends. They were my battle brothers, the only people who truly understood the sacrifice that this journey had demanded. During the drive, I constantly checked my phone, hoping for a last-minute message from Marina wishing me good luck, or saying she had changed her mind and was going to show up. But the screen remained empty, and each minute that passed, I felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. Disappointment because the woman I loved wasn't there to share with me what could be one of the most important moments of my life. Relief because I wouldn't have to deal with her tension and negativity on a day that was already stressful enough. When we arrived at the competition venue, the energy was absolutely contagious. There were hundreds of competitors from various categories, each one in impressive physical shape, all focused on the same goal. The backstage was a mix of nervousness and pure adrenaline. Some guys meditating, others warming up, many practicing poses in front of improvised mirrors. I felt small for a few seconds, seeing the quality of the other competitors, but Marcus reminded me of something fundamental. Dude, you're not here to beat anyone. You're here to show yourself what you're capable of. Those words centered me again. I started my preparation ritual, applying the bronzer, doing the pre-stage pump, adjusting the trunks, practicing the mandatory poses one last time. It was surreal to be there, after so many months dreaming about this moment, finally living it in practice. The men's physique category was the third to be called, and when I stepped on stage for the first time, the lights blinded my eyes for a few seconds. But when my vision adjusted, I saw the audience full of people, families, friends, other competitors, all there to celebrate bodybuilding and the dedication that each of us represented. Instinctively, I searched for Marina's face in the audience, hoping she had changed her mind at the last minute. I scanned each row with my eyes, but she wasn't there. For a fraction of a second, I felt a pang of sadness, but then I focused on what I had to do. The mandatory poses flowed naturally. Front lat spread, side chest, back lat spread, rear double biceps. Each movement I had practiced thousands of times in the last months. When I finished my individual presentation, I knew I had given my best, regardless of the result. Waiting for the result was an eternity condensed into 45 minutes. I was backstage trying to stay relaxed, but my heart was beating like I had run a marathon. Marcus and Derek were more nervous than me, pacing back and forth, trying to predict the result based on the judges' reactions during the comparison. When they called the category back to the stage to announce the winners, I felt like my feet had stuck to the floor. They started with 6th place, then 5th, 4th, and when they announced 3rd place, Rick Hernandez, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 3rd place in my first competition. Marcus and Derek exploded in celebration backstage, and I stepped onto the podium with a feeling of accomplishment I had never experienced before. At that moment, all the sacrifice, all the dedication, all the problems had been worth it. But as the euphoria of victory began to pass, a bitter reality started to set in. I was there, at the peak of one of the biggest achievements of my life, and the person I most wanted to share this with wasn't present. Throughout the entire event, I had managed to maintain focus, but now, with the adrenaline decreasing, I felt the weight of Marina's absence like never before. The ride back home was bittersweet. Marcus and Derek celebrating, already planning the next competition, talking about how I had potential for much more, but I could only think about how strange it would be to get home and tell someone who had rooted against me from the beginning about my 3rd place. I still had hope that we could talk, that she would understand that I hadn't done this against her. But for myself, what I didn't know is that while I was fulfilling my dream on stage, she was destroying my life behind the scenes in a way I couldn't even imagine in my worst hypothesis. When I got home after the competition, still carrying the 3rd place trophy, and with the medal hanging around my neck, the house was empty and silent, like a tomb. I looked for Marina in every room, thinking maybe she had gone out to celebrate with friends, or even to cool her head after a day of reflection. I tried calling her several times, but the calls went straight to voicemail, as if the phone was turned off or out of signal range. I sent WhatsApp messages telling her about 3rd place, saying I wanted to talk, that I missed her, but the messages weren't even delivered. I spent the entire night awake, alternating between the euphoria of achievement and a growing anguish about her disappearance. It was like 2 parallel realities were colliding inside my head. The best version of myself that had just been born on stage, and the insecure and in-love guy who couldn't understand why the woman he loved had simply vanished. On Sunday morning, I finally received the message I had been waiting for so much, but which at the same time was like a punch to the stomach. I warned you that you would regret it. It's over. 6 words that destroyed my world in a matter of seconds. I read and reread that message about 20 times, trying to understand if it was real or if I was having a nightmare. There was no explanation, no room for dialogue, nothing beyond that cold and definitive sentence. I tried calling immediately, but the phone continued out of area. I sent desperate messages asking what had happened, begging to talk, trying to understand how we had reached that point. But it was like screaming into a bottomless well. My words disappeared into the void without any response. At that moment, I understood that no matter how many medals I won or how many dreams I achieved, none of it would have meaning if I had lost the love of my life in the process. The following days were an emotional roller coaster that left me completely disoriented. I alternated between anger, sadness, confusion, and an irrational hope that she would come back when she cooled down. I tried to focus on work, but it was impossible to concentrate. I tried to return to the gym routine, but every piece of equipment, every corner of that place reminded me of her, and how everything had started there. Marcus and Derek noticed I was in bad shape and tried to cheer me up, talking about next competition, about how I had potential to go far in bodybuilding. But I could barely hear what they were saying. It was like there was a constant noise in my head, an anxiety that wouldn't leave me alone. The worst part is that I started questioning myself if she wasn't right, if I really had been selfish, if I should have given up the competition to save our relationship. It was a horrible feeling of empty victory, like I had won a battle but lost the war. On the following Monday, when I returned to the gym for the first time since the competition, I noticed something was different. People were looking at me in a strange way. It wasn't the look of admiration I expected after a good placement in a regional competition. It was something more complex, a mix of pity, curiosity, and embarrassment that I couldn't decipher. Some members who always greeted me passed by me without making eye contact. Others came to talk to me but seemed uncomfortable, as if they knew something I didn't know. Initially, I thought maybe it was my paranoia, an effect of the emotional stress I was going through, but as the workout progressed, it became clear that there was something in the air, a palpable tension that had nothing to do with post-competition preparation. It was like everyone knew a secret that I was the last to discover, and this feeling made me increasingly restless. The bomb exploded when Tommy, the most experienced trainer at the gym, called me aside after the workout. He had a serious expression I had never seen on him before and asked, "Rick, are you still dating Marina?" The question caught me by surprise because it was obvious that everyone at the gym knew we were going through problems. I replied that it was complicated, that she had broken up with me, but I still had hope of resolving things. Tommy took a deep breath and said, "Dude, I didn't want to be the bearer of this news, but there are some things you need to know. There are some rumors going around here at the gym that—" He stopped mid-sentence, as if he was afraid to continue. My heart started racing because I knew what was coming next wouldn't be good. "What kind of rumors, Tommy?" I asked, already feeling my legs getting weak. His answer changed my life forever. Tommy showed me some photos on his phone that I'll never be able to forget for the rest of my life. They were intimate photos of Marina with two guys I knew very well, Marcus and Derek, exactly the two friends who had helped me prepare for the competition, who had been by my side in the most difficult moments, who I considered my battle brother. The photos left no doubt about what was happening. They were recent. From the scenarios I could see they had been taken during my preparation, probably on the days when she said she was going out with friends. The world spun around me, and I had to lean against the wall to not fall. It wasn't just the betrayal of the woman I loved. It was the betrayal of the only friends I trusted completely. It was like everything I believed about loyalty, friendship, and love had been destroyed in a single devastating revelation. The first reaction I had after seeing those photos was such intense rage that I felt like my blood had turned to lava in my veins. It was an explosive mixture of humiliation, betrayal, and desire for revenge that I had never experienced before in my life. My mind began working in overdrive, creating confrontation scenarios where I destroyed Marcus and Derek in front of everyone at the gym, where I exposed Marina on social media, where I made them pay for every second of lies they had sold me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. I wanted to make them feel a fraction of the pain I was feeling at that moment. Tommy noticed the state I was in and grabbed me by the arm, speaking quietly, "Calm down, Rick. I know it's hard, but you can't do anything stupid now." But how could I stay calm when I discovered that the 3 most important years of my life had been a lie? How could I maintain composure when the only people I trusted had stabbed me in the back in the cruelest way possible? I left the gym that day like a zombie, driving on autopilot without even really remembering the way home. My head was a hurricane of contradictory thoughts. Part of me wanted to confront all three immediately. Part of me wanted to simply disappear from Phoenix and start a new life somewhere else. When I got home, I locked myself in the room and began connecting the dots in a way that left me even more enraged. All the times Marina had asked about Marcus and Derek, all the occasions when she had been strange with them, all the moments when she had gone out with the girls during my preparation, everything made sense now. She wasn't jealous of other women at the gym. She was creating a narrative to justify her own betrayal. It was as if she had turned my dedication and my dreams into an excuse to destroy our relationship in the most painful way possible. What revolted me most was that Marcus and Derek had pretended to be my friends, had helped me with my preparation, had shared intimate moments with me, all while literally betraying me with my girlfriend. During that night, I couldn't sleep for even 5 minutes. I kept imagining different confrontations, thinking of ways to get revenge, creating mental speeches where I humiliated all three publicly. But as the hours passed, a more rational part of my mind began to question whether revenge really was the way. I remembered conversations I had had with my father when I was a teenager about how the decisions we make in anger are usually the ones we regret most later. I also remembered a book I had read about Stoicism, which talked about how we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to what happens. It was easy to talk about philosophy when life was going well, but applying these concepts when you discover you've been betrayed by the 3 pillars of your emotional life? This was a test I never imagined I would face. On one hand, I felt I needed to seek justice, that I couldn't let it slide. On the other, I realized that any impulsive action could transform me into a person I wouldn't recognize in the mirror. The next morning arrived heavy as lead, and I woke up with a half-formed decision in my head. I was going to confront all 3, but in a calculated way, not in the heat of emotion. First, I needed more information. How long had this been going on? How had they organized to deceive me? If other people at the gym knew and stayed silent. Tommy had mentioned that they were rumors, which means that probably more people knew, and I was literally the last to find out. This realization made me feel even more humiliated, as if I were the comedic character in a tragic story, the cuckold that everyone knew about, but no one had the courage to tell. I wanted to understand every detail, every lie, every moment when they had looked me in the face and pretended to be my friends while betraying me. But at the same time, a voice in my head asked if I really wanted to carry the weight of knowing all the sordid details, if it wouldn't be better to simply cut these people out of my life and move on. What tortured me most was trying to understand each of their motivations. Marina, I could somehow understand. She was jealous, feeling threatened, and maybe in her distorted mind, betraying me with my own friends was a way to punish me for choosing competition instead of her. It was sick, it was cruel, but it had a perverse logic. But Marcus and Derek? They had nothing to gain by betraying me, except a night of pleasure with a woman they knew I loved. They had thrown away a genuine friendship, had burned their own reputation at the gym, had destroyed the trust I placed in them. All for what? For sex? For ego? For some kind of sick masculine competition that I didn't even know existed? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe I would never fully understand what had motivated this betrayal. And maybe that was the hardest part to accept. After 2 days of ruminating on these questions, I made a decision that would change my perspective on the entire situation. I was going to confront all 3, yes, but not to get revenge or create a scandal. I was going to confront them to close a chapter of my life in a way that would allow me to move forward without carrying the weight of hatred and anger. I called Tommy and asked him to arrange a conversation with Marcus and Derek at the gym, at a time when there would be less movement. I also sent a message to Marina saying I needed to talk to her, that it wasn't to get back together, but to end things maturely. I didn't know if she would show up, but I needed to at least try. The truth is that I wanted to look into the eyes of all 3 and understand how people I considered special had been capable of hurting me so deeply. But mainly, I wanted to prove to myself that I was capable of handling the most painful situation of my life without transforming into someone I despised. What I didn't expect was that this confrontation would reveal even more disturbing details about the entire situation, and that the end of this story would be much more complex than I ever imagined. The strategy I devised wasn't about revenge, it was about truth and closure. I spent 3 days planning every word, every question I would ask, every possible scenario of how they might react. I wanted to be prepared for anything, from total denial to complete confession. Tommy agreed to help by arranging the conversation with Marcus and Derek for a Thursday night, after the gym's peak hours. I said it was about important clarification related to my future in bodybuilding. Technically, it wasn't a lie, since discovering who my real friends were would definitely affect my future plans. What I didn't tell Tommy was that I had installed a recording app on my phone. It wasn't to blackmail anyone or cause legal problems. I just wanted to make sure I remembered every detail of what was said, because I knew it would be a conversation that would change my life forever. Besides, a cynical part of me thought they might try to deny everything, and I needed to be prepared for that possibility too. Marina, surprisingly, responded to my message saying she was up for talking, but that it had to be in a neutral place, away from the gym and our house. She suggested a cafe in downtown Scottsdale, where we used to go at the beginning of our relationship, an ironic choice that didn't go unnoticed by me. We arranged for Wednesday afternoon, one day before the conversation with Marcus and Derek. I thought a lot about the order of these conversations and decided it made more sense to talk to her first, because maybe she would give me information I could use to better understand the participation of the two. Also, because, despite all the anger and disappointment, a part of me still hoped she would give me some explanation that made some sense, some justification that would at least help me understand how we had reached that point. I knew it was naivety, but the heart sometimes insists on seeking logic where there is only emotional chaos. What I didn't expect was that she would arrive at that cafe with information that would completely change my perception of the entire situation. During those days of preparation, I also conducted a discreet investigation to better understand the timeline of the entire situation. I went around talking to people at the gym casually, asking indirect questions about when the rumors had started. Who else knew? If there were other details I should know. What I discovered was even more disturbing than I imagined. Apparently, the whole thing had started about 6 weeks before the competition, exactly during the period when I was most focused on preparation and least attentive to what was happening around me. Several people had seen Marina going out with Marcus in places that weren't the gym. Others had noticed chemistry between her and Derek during the few moments she still appeared at our training session. The most revolting thing was that at least 5 people at the gym knew something, but no one had the courage or consideration to tell me. It was as if I was living in a bubble of illusion, while everyone around me knew that my life was falling apart. The discovery that impacted me most came from an unexpected source. Jennifer, the same blonde woman who had made that comment about my physique and had triggered one of Marina's first jealousy crises. She approached me at the gym on Tuesday and said she needed to tell me something important. Apparently, Marina had approached her a few weeks ago and asked strange questions about me. If I flirted with other women? If I had talked about her to others? If I seemed interested in someone specific? Jennifer thought it was strange at the time, but didn't think much of it. Only later, when the rumors began to circulate, did she connect the dots and realize that Marina was trying to build a narrative where I was the culprit, where she was the victim of an unfaithful boyfriend. It was such an elaborate psychological manipulation that it made me question whether I really knew the person I had shared almost 2 years of my life with. Jennifer ended the conversation by saying something that kept echoing in my head. "Rick, some people are capable of horrible things when they feel threatened. Maybe you escaped something much worse." The night before the conversation with Marina, I made a discovery that completely changed my strategy. While organizing my things to move out of our shared house, I found a notebook of hers that had been forgotten under the bed. Normally, I would never touch her personal things, but something made me open that notebook. Maybe intuition, maybe desperation for answers. What I read there made me understand that the situation was much more complex and premeditated than I imagined. There were detailed notes about my routine, about Marcus and Derek, about how she could make Rick pay for choosing the gym instead of her. There was even a timeline of when she was going to get close to his friends, and specific plans of how she was going to document everything to show me later. It was like reading the diary of a person I didn't know, someone capable of a level of manipulation and cruelty that I would never associate with the Marina I love. After reading that notebook, I understood that the next day's conversation wouldn't be about seeking explanation or trying to understand motivation. It would be about confronting someone who had deliberately orchestrated the destruction of our relationship and my friendship with Marcus and Derek. She hadn't acted on impulse or uncontrolled jealousy. She had planned every step of this revenge with a coldness that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and human nature. That night, I made a final decision about how I would conduct the conversations of the next few days. It would no longer be about seeking closure or forgiveness. It would be about exposing the truth and protecting other people from going through what I went through. But what I would discover in the next 48 hours would be even more shocking than everything I had discovered so far. Because the story I thought I completely understood was about to take a turn that no one, not me, not Marina, not Marcus, not Derek, saw coming. Can you believe everything that happened in this story? I'm still processing everything to this day, because when you discover that the people closest to you are capable of such elaborate manipulation, you really question your ability to judge people's character. But I want to know from you, what would you do in my place? If you discovered such a calculated betrayal, how would you react? Do you think I should have gotten revenge, or did I do right in trying to resolve everything maturely?